Well, let me say ahead of time that the story I'm about to tell you, it will connect with the text that you heard written, but it's not in the Bible. I made it up. But it is, I would call, a spirit-filled imagination. It's no small thing to be a centurion, and the centurion at Capernaum was no different. Their job to prepare 100 men for battle, to keep their mental and physical discipline at a peak. Most centurions came from the lower plebeian class, and they were not educated. He was chosen to be a centurion, like all centurions, because of bravery in battle. And the centurion at Capernaum had the scars to prove it, stripes up and down his right arm, his left thigh all pocked and marked, and a slice running down the left side of his face. The centurion leads his men by example, you see, out in front of the soldiers, sword drawn in the thick of the battle, hacking away at the enemy until victory was won. And for this, a centurion was paid 15 more times than the average Roman soldier. But of course, he was 15 more times likely to be killed, wasn't he? The centurion at Capernaum was rewarded by his superiors, having passed his prime on the battlefield, and he was given this post in Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee in Israel and the backwaters of the Roman Empire. He had 100 men to keep the peace there, and he had been told that the Galileans were a difficult people. For over the last century or so, there had been 6 revolts in Israel, each one led by a man who called himself the Messiah. And guess where every one of those messiahs came from? Galilee, the region in which Capernaum was situated. And guess what happened to each of those messiahs? Dead, either killed in battle or executed. So the Romans wanted a centurion whose reputation might keep future messiahs from rising up. But the centurion at Capernaum discovered that most of the people there weren't difficult at all. They were just regular folks, like everyone else, trying to scratch out a living and raise a family. Oh, well, religiously, they were odd enough. They believed in just one God. They believed that this God created all things. In the Roman Empire, there were hundreds of fertility religions and spiritual healers out to make some money, to which the empire said, live and let live. And the Jews, of course, were glad for that. However, they did not want to bow to Caesar, who called himself a god. Emperor worship was the official religion of the empire, and everyone was supposed to pay homage to him. The centurion of Capernaum wasn't the only Roman soldier to say, an emperor doth not a god make. However, if you control the largest and most advanced army in the world, you can do most anything you want. It doesn't make you a god, though. It just makes you feared. It doesn't make you right. It just makes you hated. The centurion wasn't the only Roman who crossed his fingers behind his back when he bowed to a statue of Caesar. He thought the whole thing rather silly. He told the elders of the synagogue in Capernaum, just cross your fingers. But they wouldn't. And so he told little lies in his reports about them, about how compliant they were to all the laws. You see, he was tired of the killing. And why not? The Jews were good people. He saw the women with their gurgling babies in the streets. He watched children running and playing, grinning ear to ear. Watching them, he felt a bit of an ache in his heart, for Roman soldiers don't tend to get married. They travel, they kill, they risk being killed. Consequently, he felt he would never have a child. This ache lived within him. Yes, he has medals for valor and respect from his soldiers, and he had earned the fear of his enemies, but he'd never had love. He saw how the Jews cared for each other, how they had laws about feeding the poor, how they sought peace in their dealings, and after all his years of wondering if he would live past the next battle, after years of nightmares and monstrous memories, peace was fine with him. And he came to love Capernaum and the Jews there. However, he stumbled onto a problem when he remarked about how their synagogue was falling down. You love your God and your neighbor, he said to the elders, but your place of worship is in shambles. Don't you want to honor your God? Well, yes, of course, they replied, we do, but we are a poor people. We have so little. And it occurred to him that maybe he should use the resources under his command to repair a synagogue for them. But his superiors hated the Jews, and surely they would frown on using so many resources for the local populace, and certainly he would be ridiculed by the other centurions in Israel when they gathered for their meetings. Oh, look who built a house for the invisible God. Oh, look who's gone soft, building a headquarters for the next Galilean uprising. And his punishment, of course, could have been worse than ridicule. But he did make up his mind in this quandary. It was surprise that brought him to making up his mind. Early one morning, just after the sun had risen, a guard brings him a box. The guard says, I found this box at the front gate. And look. And he looks inside, and inside the box is an abandoned baby, a little girl, a dark head full of hair, deep blue eyes, silent, just looking up at him. The guard said she already has the mark of a slave on her. I can get rid of her, but I thought you would just want to know. Oh no, he said, don't get rid of her. Give her to me. And so the guard gave her to him. And the centurion lifted the baby from the box, and off a nearby desk he pulled a linen and wrapped the baby in the linen. And he looked at the baby and said to himself, you are a gift. You are a gift from the Jews' God, the creator of all things. Out of nothing, you have given me a child. And he held the child up into the air and said, I give thanks to you, God of the Jews, for giving me someone to love. And so he, on that day, decided he was going to not simply repair the synagogue for the Jews in Capernaum. He was going to build them a new synagogue, a way of saying thanks for the gift. He didn't care, he thought. Let them demote me, let them disgrace me. This is the right thing to do, to give a gift to the one who gives the gift of life. The synagogue was as beautiful as his little slave girl, who gave him delight as she grew. She would ride with him through Capernaum, waving at the people. She would delight in the stories the elders of the synagogue would tell of their ancestors, of David and Goliath, of Ruth and Naomi. She was the centurion's most valued possession. More than a slave, she was a daughter to him. And in his mind, he thought when she grew up, he would free her legally and make her a free person, his daughter. But when she was 7 years old, she took very ill. Her forehead was as hot as the desert, and she fell into a deep sleep from which she could not be awakened. The centurion was beside himself. Here he was, the most powerful man in Capernaum, and he could do nothing to heal her. The elders told him of a traveling rabbi, a holy man with spiritual powers. He was from Galilee. He had visited our synagogue in Capernaum, they said, and he cast demons out of a man there. Surely our God works wonders through him. He had healed people at a home along the Sea of Galilee. He had cleansed a leper. He had sent a paralytic away walking. Multitudes from all of Judea had come to be healed and to hear his message of love, which included loving your enemies. But the centurion wondered, would this rabbi, this holy man, help a Roman centurion who had killed many of his enemies with such skilled efficiency? Only one way to find out. He sent the elders away to beg to the rabbi to come and to heal his daughter, and they said that they would, but they couldn't guarantee anything, so off they went to find him. But after they were gone, he realized, my goodness, what kind of a man am I to invite such a holy man into my house? I bow to Caesar. I cross my fingers. I don't live up to my commitments, you see. I've killed man after man after man on the battlefield. So his friends were sitting there waiting with him by the slave girl, and he said to them, would you run to the elders and tell them to tell the rabbi that he shouldn't shame himself by entering my house. In fact, tell him that because I'm a man who has a lot of power and I have 100 men working for me, I can get things done just by giving a command. I don't have to be there. Why, surely this holy man wouldn't have to shame himself by coming into my house. He could get things done without having to be here. And so they run off. And after they run off, he goes to the slave girl's room where she lay in her bed, and he closed his eyes like he had seen the elders of the synagogue do, and he prayed a prayer that his slave girl would live. And then he bent over her and he kissed her forehead. Wait, he thought, her forehead didn't seem so hot. And he kissed her again, and sure enough, she seemed cooler. And he called one of the woman servants into the room, and he said, would you feel her forehead? It feels like she is cooling off. And she did. Yes, she said, she is cooling off. And just then the slave girl's eyes opened, and those deep blue eyes looked out at him. And she smiled. And like she did on the streets, she raised her little hand and she waved at him. He had not felt so much joy since the day she was found on their front step. The elders and his friends came running in, breathless, and they saw her sitting up, and they cheered. And the elders fell on their knees and they prayed a prayer. It was a great day of celebration, and a feast was had in the household. The centurion of Capernaum asked the elders to keep track of this rabbi. And the elders reported when he went with his followers through the towns, casting out demons, healing the sick, speaking his message of the love of the one God for all people. They said that he was attracting so many followers that the chief priests in the temple were afraid he was planning a revolution. And the Romans wondered too, they said. But the centurion was puzzled. His message was peace. His message is peace. Yes, they replied. But he has a power that threatens those in power. The rabbi never returned to Capernaum again. A few years later, the elders came to the centurion with bad news. They said, the rabbi who healed your daughter, the Romans have crucified on a hill outside of Jerusalem with other criminals. And he fell to his knees and he wept. This rabbi, he thought, was different than the other so-called messiahs who had come from Galilee to revolt against Rome. He did not rally people with swords and spears with the promise of rousting Rome from power. He called people to peace, to love, to joy. He called to the little children and told them to come to him. But on the other hand, he thought, he was the same as the 6 other messiahs from Galilee. He failed. Unless his followers can bring his message to the future, then maybe the one God can lead all people into peace. Then maybe men won't have to kill one another on the battlefield and call it honor. Then maybe soldiers won't have to live with nightmares and terrorizing memories. And if that were to happen, maybe he is the Messiah.